Hello, this is Irv Shapiro with the MakeWithTech channel. And some of the videos that I've made over the years that have done the very best are videos about Creality printers and videos about Cura. Maybe because of their penetration in the marketplace. Well, interestingly, the Creality printers I've reviewed in the past, I either bought myself or they came from a distributor. It seems that Creality's marketing department has noticed that people like my Creality videos, or at least they watch them, and so they've shown me some love. This stuff sitting in front of me was all sent to me directly from Creality at no cost to me, completely free. It's a Creality Ender 3 V2 Neo printer, a Creality Smart Kit, and a couple reels of Creality branded filament. Now, I made very clear to the marketing department, and I do this with every marketing department that reaches out to me, that I do not guarantee I'll make a video. I will not let them watch the video before I publish it. And I'm free to say whatever I want, good, bad, or indifferent. Now, you might think, though, that if Creality's sending me goodies, I want to say good things about Creality so I get more goodies. Well, I have more goodie offers than I can handle at this point. I get a request about weekly, every single week, from someone who wants to send me a 3D printer, filament, a laser engraver, a laser cutter, woodworking equipment. I even got a request to do a review of a gamer's chair. My grandsons were very disappointed I turned that one down. So I don't need to say good things about Creality, so I have things to talk about on this channel. With that as a bit of full disclosure and background, I'm going to dig into the Ender 3 line of printers. I'm going to start by telling you where they fit, my perspective on that. And then we're going to do an unboxing and initial review and some analysis of the Ender 3 V2 Neo. So stay tuned and let's learn something together. Now, many of you who have watched the series of videos on this channel know that MakeWithTech is more than just a YouTube channel. It's a forum, a place you can go and to talk about things you've built, things you've made. You can share pictures, you can share actual files, called forum.makewithtech.com. You know that it's also models.makewithtech.com, a place you can go that's completely different from every other place you go to get 3D models. Because instead of selecting a model, you select a template. And then you take that template and you fill in some parameters and it generates for you a custom model every time. So the hundreds of templates on models.makewithtech.com produce thousands and thousands of variations of actual models. And all of these things are supported by you. And one of the best ways you can support this enterprise, in essence, the MakeWithTech community, not only by participating in the forums and downloading models, but you also can just watch videos. So thank you very much for watching this video. If you like it, give me a thumbs up, share the video, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell so you're notified about new videos that come out. Now, to get started here, I'm going to put these extra goodies from Creality aside. And I have a list here of the Ender 3 printers. And I'd like to position where this Ender 3 V2 Neo fits into the ecosystem. Now, Creality has really stepped up their game in the last couple of years, adding a wide range of printers. Some people think, in fact, I think, too many different models. I think it's a bit confusing. They've significantly improved their software infrastructure of Creality Cloud. And they're working on, but they probably still have some work to do on having consistently released high-quality firmware. Where does this fit into the system within Creality? Well, first of all, I'm a fan of the Ender line of printers. I think they're very good price points for value for features. The entry-level Ender printer, and you can see this here on the screen, I'm looking at it on a printout here, is the Ender 3, the original Ender 3. It's still made. I have one that's probably 3 years old. It might be officially an Ender 3 Plus, which is a very minor upgrade. And it works great. These are printers that just work. Next, they came out just a couple years ago, maybe less, with the Ender 3 version 2. And that is a quieter printer with a new 32-bit control board, new style of LCD screen, which has pluses and minuses in my opinion. But the big change, much easier to assemble than an Ender 3. And it's the printer I recommend to a lot of people. Then they came up with the Neo line, and we're going to talk about that in a second. Let's first skip over this Neo line because it sort of fits in this tier by itself, and go to the Ender 3 S1 line. The Ender 3 S1, in my opinion, is the professional or semi-pro version of the Ender 3. I think it competes very favorably. In particular, the Ender 3 S1 Pro competes very favorably with the Prusa MK3 line of 3D printers at a much lower price point. Now, architecturally, it's quite different because the way Ender, Creality specifically, does auto bed leveling is different than the way Prusa does it. But for hundreds of dollars less, I think an Ender 3 S1 Pro is the printer I would buy in a semi-professional environment. Specifically, the Pro model advantage over the S1 is it can print it up to 300 degrees Celsius. So I have a video on this channel about using it to print nylon and other exotic materials that are difficult to print. The S1 line, both the printers are direct extruders. The other three, the Ender 3, the Ender 3 version 2, the Ender 3 version 2 Neo that we're going to look at today are all Bowden style printers. So that's where it fits in the realm. I would treat the basic Ender 3s as good printers. I think we have to see. I haven't printed with it yet, but based on the specs, I think the Neo line is probably the better level. Why? Specifically, all of the Neo flagged printers have an auto bed leveling system built in. It's the Creality CR Touch, which is in essence a knockoff of a BL Touch. But the important part is it's factory integrated. That means the firmware has already been upgraded, and upgrading firmware is tricky for some people. So that's a big plus. It has a metal extruder instead of a plastic extruder. Now, I've generally found the Ender extruders to be quite good. However, on my higher end Ender printers, like the Ender 5 that I enhanced significantly, and it was my go-to printer before I got an S1, I did upgrade to an all-metal extruder. The all-metal extruders can put a little more pressure on the filament. They're a little more consistent. They give you a better chance at printing filaments that are more difficult, like TPU. But if you really want to print TPU, you want a direct extruder like the S1. So I'm going to carefully open this up because you don't want to cut what's inside. And as I was editing this video, I realized it had gotten much too long. Nobody wants to watch a 45-minute or longer video. So I'm skipping over the unboxing of this printer. I'm sure there will be other videos on YouTube where people take it out of the box. Let me just very quickly tell you what assembly consists of, and then recommend that instead of using the instruction manual, you go to the Creality site and you watch their assembly videos. The gantry comes fully assembled. I mean fully assembled. That means the X-axis is on there, the extruder is on there. In fact, the cable's even connected to the base. So it makes it a little tricky to take it out of the box, but all you need to do is you take everything out of the box, being careful with this cable because it's connected to the base. You set the top gantry on the base. You slide it off the edge of a table so you can get to the 2 holes underneath, and you put in 4 bolts. That's the hardest part of the assembly. Next, you put the reel on top. You attach with 3 bolts, 3 actually extrusion nuts, the LCD, and then you plug in a variety of cables that are all labeled. So go to the Creality site or look in the user's guide. I found the user's guide really didn't have good instructions. Go to the Creality site, watch the instructions, and then you can assemble your printer. Now, you'll notice on this printer, I have one addition that is not standard. This here is literally a badge holder. I recommend you go and you buy the least expensive badge holder you can get because you want the spring to be very loose. You attach it to the top of the gantry and to the cable here that will keep it out of the way of your prints. You'll notice this printer does have the new V2 style print head mechanism. On this printer, all of the belts are adjustable. Both my belts, the belt here adjuster and the belt adjuster here, were loose. You should feel a little tension when you're turning these, and the belts should be snug. You don't want to over tighten them because it will shorten the life of your belts, but you want them to be snug. And this should move nice and smooth. Both these should move nice and smooth. Likewise, there are eccentric bolts on all Ender style printers with a bed slinger or with a Y-axis like this. And an eccentric bolt is just, I'll show you a close-up of it, but in this case, it's a eccentric nut. I misspoke. The eccentric nut is a nut right here that by tightening and loosening, you move this wheel in or out, because you'll notice here there are wheels that hold this. When you move it in, you tighten it. You want those to be so that they move smoothly and there's not a lot of give. These seem pretty good already, so I didn't have to tighten those. Now, the additions here, once again, are this magnetic print surface that is a sheet of metal. It makes it really easy to pop off prints. And if you have any trouble getting the print off, just stick this whole thing in the freezer for 5 minutes or so, and it will come right off. Because basically, these surfaces release at about 20 degrees Celsius. So once you get it down to 20 degrees Celsius or so, your print should release very easily. I sometimes will just use a little fan to cool them off more quickly. This printer, interestingly enough, does have spring adjustments on the print bed. I like that. I like being able to manually adjust it. But there is no Z-axis adjustment sensor. So the only way this printer knows how far the nozzle is from the print surface is based on sensing with this electronic, this basically a physical electronic sensor. The cable management on this printer is very good. It has the nice little drawer. The extrusions are nice and clean. Everything is covered. There are caps on everything. It looks like the best Ender 3 I've had to date. So now we're ready to turn it on, and I'm going to show you the approach I used, which is more elaborate than that recommended by Creality. Here's the reason. If you read reviews of this printer online, or you see comments in various YouTube videos, you'll see some people will comment that they find the auto bed leveling inconsistent. I think in many cases that may be because they set it up improperly. And they'll comment as an example that the Prusa auto bed leveling works great. Well, the first difference. The Prusa bed is fixed. It has no springs on it or things that are sensitive to temperature. It may be good, may be bad, but it's a design decision. These springs will expand or contract a little bit based on temperature. So the first print you make every day, you need to run auto bed leveling before that first print. So this auto bed leveling mechanism can sense the distance to the bed over the different springs that may have expanded or contracted because of temperature. Now, that may seem like extra work. The Prusa that people use as the gold standard for auto bed leveling, it does that before every print. So I'm going to plug this in now. We'll turn it on for the first time. No, it's not your imagination. I do have a different shirt on, and I've changed the camera view. And the reason is that I've already completed now all of my test prints. I'll give you a hint. They came out really well. But while doing that, I discovered there was probably a more straightforward way to explain to you how to manually level your print bed so your CR Touch auto bed leveling will be reliable. So let's get started with that. I'm going to start by turning on the printer. You're going to hear the fan sounds when I do that. And now I'm going to go to the front panel, and I'm going to switch over to Control, click it once, go to Temperature, click it once, go to Bed Temperature, click it once, increase it to 50 degrees Celsius, and click it so it'll start heating up the bed. Now, I picked 50 degrees Celsius because it's going to be warm enough that the surface will expand a little bit, but not so hot that I have to worry about getting burned. So the first thing I'm going to do is let's go back by clicking on back to the main menu. Let's go to Prepare, and we'll say Auto Home. Now, if I take a Post-it note, and I'm a fan of using Post-it notes for this, just because they're the right size, and I fold over the sticky side, I can see I can slide this right under here. There's no resistance. That print head is not at the surface of the print bed. And the reason is that when you auto home, it moves the print head at the end to about 12 millimeters. We're going to have to fix that. But first, I'm going to move this print head over this spring right here. So I'm going to go to Move X, and I'm going to move it back this way manually by rotating this knob. Okay, so that looks good. Now I'm going to click once, and then I can move to Move Y. That looks good. Once again, though, we're way off the print bed. So I need to now adjust the Z height, not Z offset. So I can go to Move Z, and we're going to move Z down to, and this time I have to look at the console. I'm going to move it down till it's exactly at 0. Click once to lock it in place. Now, depending on how your printer came from the factory, this might be pretty close, or it might have a big gap here. Doesn't really matter, but once we adjust these wheels, we want there to be resistance on the paper, but you want to still be able to move it. So hear how it's a little bit gritty there? That's the sound you want. Now, when you turn these wheels counterclockwise, what you're in essence doing is tightening the spring. That's going to move the bed down. When you turn the wheel clockwise, you're loosening the spring. That's going to move the bed up. So we have this in the right position. Now, let's go over and say Move X and move it to the other corner. If you chose to, you could take and move the Z height up a little bit so you don't scratch the bed. But if your bed's pretty level to start, you're not going to scratch it. We slide a piece of paper under it, and we make sure it's about the same as the other corner was. Now, we want to do that for all 4 corners. And we want to do it twice. Because you have a plane here. When you move one corner, it moves the other corner. So we have to do it a couple times until the corners are all relatively close. And then we're ready for the next step. For the next step, go back to the Prepare menu and click on Auto Home. And remember now, you're going to be well off the print surface. So now I'm going to go to Move, move Z, and once again, move it down to 0. Oh, very interesting. I can just turn it rapidly because 0 is where it'll stop. Click there, put a piece of paper underneath. Now, it may be that you're perfect. In our case, we're perfect because I've already adjusted it. But in all likelihood, you're going to be a little bit off the print surface still. And the way you fix that is you go back to the Prepare menu, you select Z offset, and you change that number. If you make that number more negative, you're going to lower the print head. If you make that number more positive, you're going to raise it up. In my case, minus 2.32 is the perfect position. Hear that sound? That's absolutely perfect. Now that I've manually leveled the print bed, I'm almost ready for my first print. But first, I need to run auto bed leveling. That's going to check 16 points across the bed, store the minor variations between the probe and the bed, and use those to adjust the print. So I'm going to show you that in high speed, then we'll continue with testing some prints. On the front panel, I'm going to level, and I'm clicking level. And now we're ready for our first print. Okay, I've spent a few days with the printer now, and I've printed a bunch of samples. Let me tell you what I've learned. Well, first I'll cut sort of to the bottom line. This is a really good printer with one major flaw. And the major flaw that I saw was that the procedure I had to go through to manually level the bed to ensure the auto bed leveling would be consistent was unacceptable. There's a standard feature in Marlin 2.0, which is what the firmware is loosely based on. And that feature is called manual bed leveling. On other Ender printers, the Ender 3 S1 as an example, I believe they call it auxiliary bed leveling. And it's a feature where from the front panel, you just run that manual procedure and it automatically moves the print head to the proper positions, and it moves the print head to the 0 offset. Something I did manually. That should be standard in this printer. And I think that's an oversight by Creality. That said, let's take a look at the print sample. So the first print sample I printed was this rabbit from the SD card. It's an excellent print sample. There's almost no stringing at all. One little string here between the ears. The layer lines are very, very nice. There is a noticeable seam. That's really a result of the slicer, but it worked very well. And it stuck to the print surface very well. I really like this print surface. The ability to take the print surface off and flex it to get a print off is very good. That said, it sticks really well. You don't want your print head to be too close to the surface. When you're adjusting your Z offset, don't crank it down so you can't move that piece of paper. You should be able to move the piece of paper. If you do crank it down, you won't be able to get your prints off. And in fact, I probably had a little too tight because I had to use my favorite print removal tool, which is a single blade razor blade in a holder to get just under the corners. If you use this nice and flat on the surface, it makes it really easy to get prints off and doesn't damage the surface. So the first print, very nice. Second print was a print from models.makewithtech.com. This is a print of a soap dish that you can make whatever size you want, because at models.makewithtech.com, you're not downloading models, you're selecting a template and then you're customizing it. I made it this particular size. This sticks with a piece of permanent double stick tape onto the side of your shower or onto a glass mirror for your soap. Once again, a beautiful print. Now, in addition to the printer, I'm doing something else new here. I'm using Creality Filament for the first time. I'm impressed. This gray Creality filament almost makes the layer lines invisible. And this was printed at a 0.2 millimeter layer line, which is relatively coarse. Beautiful print. So then I wanted to make sure the extruder was extruding properly and dimensions were correct. So I printed a calibration cat. These calibration cats are exactly 20 millimeters on a side. So let's take our caliper here. I'm going to turn it on, hit the 0 key to make sure it's currently at 0. And then we will check a side of this cat, 20.01. I don't know if you can see that. 20.01. That's quite good. Let's check the other dimension. And this is 19.98. 19.98. So we're off at most 0.3 millimeters. That's an excellent print. So the extruder is very, very consistent. It's working very well. But it's also telling us that the belts and the eccentric nuts that adjust the wheels that hold the print head on the gantry, they adjust the wheels that hold the print bed, and the belts have been tightened appropriately so they're firm. Those are all tightened properly. So good extruder, well-tightened belts, not over-tightened because that will wear them out more quickly. Well-tightened belts, snug, and I've checked the eccentric nuts so nothing is wobbling about. This printer produced a very reliable print. Now I wanted to try something a little different, so I printed a vase. And I tested two things about this vase. I tested speed and I tested quality. Overall, this Ender 3 is like every other Ender 3 except for the S1, and that is it's relatively slow. The recommended print speed in the slicer is 50 millimeters per second. You can push that up to 100. Depending on your print, it may not make as much difference as you think, because when you increase the top line print speed in a Cura-based slicer, it doesn't necessarily double the speed of every parameter. It's a complex set of parameters, and it doesn't impact the jerk and acceleration settings about how quickly your printer can change direction. So it may not actually double the speed. What will double the speed is going to the front panel of your printer and going under tune to speed and making it 200%. So for most of this vase, which is basically perfect, I had it at the default speed. Then I moved it up to 200%. And you can see in the close-up here that there are lots of bumps on this print. So what's happening? Well, the faster you print, the more accurate the extruder needs to be, and the ability of the nozzle to extrude just the right amount of filament has to be fine-tuned. You also have to fine-tune retraction, because what's happening is when you're printing a circle, it's not actually a circle. It's a bunch of straight lines, and the smaller those straight lines, the more it looks like a circle. So if you want a really good looking circle, use a lot of little tiny lines. And if you're printing very fast, you're making those moves very, very quickly. And when you're making those moves very quickly, when you pause for a second, deaccelerate to change direction, some filament may ooze out of your nozzle. That's called a bump. So how can you reduce the number of bumps? Make those line segments longer. That also makes it easier for the printer to control the flow of filament because it's extruding a longer segment. How do you do that? Well, you go into your Cura-based slicer and you look at an advanced option. That means you have to go to the hamburger menu, click on that little bar menu and set advanced. Then you go down to mesh features, or you search for maximum deviation. And the maximum resolution. And the maximum resolution was set at 0.25. I changed it to 1 millimeter. So I said to the printer, never print a line less than 1 millimeter long. Now, that will make this much smoother. And in fact, I'll show you an example of that in a minute. but it will impact your ability to print very, very tiny details. So generally that's set below your nozzle size. I set it bigger because I knew I was printing a vase and I wanted it to just look beautiful. So I set it to 1 millimeter. Now there is one other offsetting factor. When you're making that circle, the difference between the actual line and the circle, and I'll show you a picture here you can see, is called the maximum deviation. If by going to a longer segment, I'm going to end up with a maximum deviation that's over a certain amount, it won't do it. So maximum deviation was set to 0.025, a very small number. I increased that to 0.1. By making those changes and then printing another vase, now ideally I should have probably printed the same vase, but another vase, this one comes off models at MakeWithTech.com, and you can set the dimensions, you can set the number of sides, you can make it bigger on the top or smaller on the top. Actually, quite a nice template. I ended up with an absolutely perfect print. So let me wrap this all up. This is a very good printer. Is it the right printer for you? Well, a basic Ender 3, this is assuming right now we're talking Creality printers, because there are other printers in this price range. A basic Ender 3 is $200. The Ender 3 V2, not Neo, is $250. This is $300. So basically, when compared to the Ender 3 V2, this is $50 more. For that $50, you get auto bed leveling, you get this really nice print surface, you get the ability to see images in your LCD. Theoretically, they could add that to the other printer by just upgrading the firmware. You get an all-metal extruder. I think it is well worth the money. The parts alone would be probably more. I haven't priced them out, but probably more. So I think this is the printer I'm going to recommend to most new hobbyists looking for their first. Thanks so much. If you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up, recommend it to other people, click on the bell so you're notified, and let's continue to learn things together.